High school sweetheart girlfriend, blindsided me with a breakup, and now I'm overhauling my life in hopes of winning her back. Until 2 weeks ago, I believed my girlfriend and I had a strong, unshakable relationship. We were each other's first loves, high school sweethearts who survived 6 years of long distance, even a whole year in college separated by opposite sides of the world. Sure, we had our rocky moments, but we'd also built up a treasure trove of happy memories that made me think our bond was unbreakable. 2 years after we finally settled in the same city again, things started to shift. She began giving off these subtle signs of dissatisfaction, but I was too oblivious to pick up on them. Then, one day, as we were relaxing together, she suddenly confided that she loved me deeply, but she couldn't see how I fit into her future. She was afraid that if we ever got married, she'd end up becoming too angry at me and might have to leave. She assured me there was no one else and suggested maybe we'd be better off as lifelong friends instead. I was blindsided, completely stunned and upset, so much so that I couldn't even muster an argument. I just agreed to her request. We would take a 3-week break from each other. Within hours, my panic took over and I found myself calling her twice. The second time, she answered but said nothing. I admitted that I was panicking, hoping for any kind of comfort. Instead, she told me to use that energy for something productive. All I could say was, okay. Bye. Guided by advice from a good friend, I decided to go no contact, even though it was agonizing. After a horror-filled couple of days, something snapped in me. I realized the truth. I had become a terrible boyfriend and had totally taken her for granted. Sure, she had made her mistakes like plotting a breakup in secret rather than talking to me, but mine were worse. That realization hit so hard, it shook me out of my rut. In the past 2 weeks, consumed by endless reflection, I've been making real changes. I started working out nearly every day. Video games and porn? Instantly cut out of my life. I made time for friends again, asked myself if I was truly living up to my own potential at work, and most importantly I began figuring out who I actually want to be, and taking steps to get there. Even though it's only been 2 weeks, and maybe some of my motivation is a stubborn hope to win her back, I feel myself growing more confident. Instead of sitting around waiting for good things to happen, I'm choosing action. To help myself move forward, I blocked her on Facebook, signed her out of my Netflix, and hid away everything that reminded me of her. Still, knowing we're on a break keeps me from letting go completely. Her shadow lingers in my mind. Now, I see myself as a more functional adult, not some passive, needy shell. If she's willing to give us another chance, I'm ready. We could have something incredible together if she's willing to meet me halfway. My instincts scream at me to take bold action, to show her concretely that I'm no longer the wait around and hope type. But I refuse to let her think I need her to rescue me. Instead, I'm going to wait out the break, then insist we meet on my terms, not hers. I want to show her through my actions unless she asks directly how much I've changed. In terms of getting back together, I think she broke us, so she needs to be the one to mend us. I'll let her back and only if she's ready to commit to open, honest communication in the future. If it doesn't work out, I'll hand her a bag with everything she's given me over the years and walk away. No friendship, no nothing. Completely over each other. Especially not when you're the one who got dumped. So, I made a mental game plan, no to friendship, but a qualified yes to maybe dating again. I chewed over a bunch of possible scenarios for our talk, but tried not to script exact lines. If I try too hard to be witty, I stop actually listening, something I've been guilty of more than a few times before. Saturday came. I got myself looking sharp, new clothes, fresh haircut, pumped up from a gym session, and determined to lead with confidence. When we met, her smile genuinely made the weight on my chest float away for just a second. She told me it was great to see me and, for a moment, I almost believed things could go back to the way they were. But the happiness didn't last. The more we talked about what we'd been up to during those 3 weeks apart, the more it stunned to realize I'd been deliberately excluded from her life. Suddenly she was into my musical passion, even planning to hit up concerts and festivals, when just a month ago she'd had only dragged me to ballet and concertos. I forced myself to stay calm, no embarrassing tears this time. Then, once we sat down to discuss next steps, she asked what I thought. I probably made a mistake by immediately bringing up the past dating into when she first thought about breaking up, whether she'd tried to tell me what was wrong. I needed to understand where our communication had failed, but by the time she answered that it had been brewing for months and she'd just been waiting for when I seemed most stable, she was already fighting back tears. That's just her, deliberate, holding it together until she's ready, then acting decisively. She repeated her question, what did I think? I'd wanted to stick to my plan, to let her steer the conversation to a make or break point, and focus on communication, but my emotions trampled all over that logic. I blurted out something like, "I want to try again to make this work." I swear, I saw a switch flip in her. She turned away. Shit. The conversation stretched over an hour and most of it became a blur for me. What emerged was she hadn't changed her mind at all, except now she saw we were very compatible. She didn't want the old relationship back, though. I told her that relationship was dead, what I wanted was to start something new. I told her about the changes I'd made, how much healthier I was living now. She said she was proud and happy for me, but still, she didn't want a new relationship. Not now, not with me. That's when I saw the friendship trap about to spring. I told her, flat out, we couldn't be friends. She froze. I told her it was a binary choice, either she's with me completely, or she's without me completely. She cried, and finally said she'd rather be without me. When things had calmed, she gave me a handwritten excerpt from a poem about how adversity strengthened our relationship. That completely threw me. As I walked away, I kept wondering, did she actually expect me to sweep her off her feet? Did she think I'd swear I'd never let her go, promise her the world? Every lesson I'd learned screamed at me, do not chase after her. But in that moment it felt like I had nothing left to lose. If I didn't try, I might regret it forever. So I did the thing everyone in the movies does. I called her, found out where she was, and ran to find her again. When I caught up, I grabbed her, told her I loved her, and yes, I tried to kiss her. Please, go ahead and cringe. She wasn't swept off her feet by my grand gesture. Instead, she just looked at me, almost exasperated, and said, "So I have to explain myself all over again? But you know what? I'm actually glad I did it, because this time she was as clear and unambiguous as she's ever been. Not with any cruelty, just honesty. She told me again, she wasn't ready to be in a new relationship, with anyone. She said again that she would rather risk losing me forever than start new with me right now when she wasn't 100% sure. She said she'd leave it up to me whether I ever wanted to see her again. I mumbled, this was a mistake. She said, no, I really appreciate it. Right, nothing like the ego boost of knowing you're still the one in control. But she was really torn up too. I've never seen her look so unhappy. We parted ways, truly parted this time, and as I walked away, I realized I wasn't as ready for the conversation as I'd thought. I'd made improvements to my lifestyle, but I was still being driven by my fear of loneliness. In the end, though, mediocre as my performance might have been, it felt better to have finality than to drag it out or skip meeting her entirely. And even chasing after her at the end, I don't regret it. It laid her thoughts bare for me. I finally understood she'd stopped loving me romantically sometime before we even broke up, even if there was still a sort of platonic affection there. As I sat with all of this over the next few days, my vision started to clear. I realized I'd been completely blinded by her superficial qualities. It wouldn't have mattered if she hadn't forced me away. She was impossible not to adore. She's beautiful enough to be scouted for modeling gigs on the street, filthy rich, brilliantly articulate, on her way to becoming a world-class scholar. And the sex? Well, it was absolutely incredible, back when she wanted it. She could tie a knot in a cherry stem with her tongue. She used to spoil me endlessly. Seriously, I became accustomed to a level of care and attention that felt like it would never end. She planned vacations for us, whisking me away to the Midwest, the Caribbean, and even East Asia. Whenever distance separated us, she flooded my inbox with these long, heartfelt love letters. The first time she met my friends? She organized a surprise birthday celebration for me, gathering everyone even though she barely knew most of them. And then there were the more intimate moments, the way she would hold me, the gifts, the unfiltered affection. Honestly, I probably only ever reciprocated about 10% of what she gave. I'd never known anything different, so I took everything she did for granted. I had absolutely no foresight. But, of course, there were cracks beneath all that luxury. She had class and poise, sure, but forming connections with new people was not her strength. I'd introduce her to my friends, and she'd immediately clam up, distant and silent, more like an elegant statue than a living person. Because of this, I'd end up abandoning my independent social life, always choosing to spend time with her and her circle. It left me feeling smothered, and now that it's over, I feel the absence of my own friends so much more acutely. She kept our relationship a secret from her dysfunctional family for all 8 years. 8 years. Her excuse was always, we have such a good thing going, I don't want to get them involved. But it made me feel like there was an essential part of her I was never allowed to know. Add to that our differences in faith, she's Christian, I'm not, and suddenly there's a divide that was always quietly looming over us. But the thing that keeps me up at night is the realization that our relationship was never truly equal. Around the 4th year, as the cracks became undeniable, I asked her why she loved me. Her answer was to hand me the children's book Corduroy, a story about a lovingly naive teddy bear being chosen and sewn up by a little girl. But now I wonder, did anyone ever tell Corduroy what happens when the girl grows up and moves on? After the breakup, she admitted she started planning my exit as soon as she finished grad school. Sometimes I believe, even if she didn't mean to do it consciously, that I was an emotional crutch for her, just someone to lean on while she made it through college. She showered me with gifts, kept me around until it was time to find her marriage material, and then quietly, methodically, pushed me out of her life. I keep torturing myself with the thought that I should have been the one to end things sooner. I was petrified of losing what I thought was the best part of my life, and I refused to even consider how unhealthy the dynamic really was. If I'd stepped back and looked objectively, I would have seen that I'd been caught in this one-way dependency, sucked dry by a relationship that would inevitably collapse. And yet, there's still a part of me that wonders, could we ever work again, if we started over on new terms? We had our problems, but maybe those could be fixed with honest communication and genuine effort. She told me she wasn't ready for a relationship right now, but sometimes I think the real truth is our history has become too heavy for us to carry forward together. For now, all I can do is focus on myself, picking up the pieces, getting my apartment back together, refocusing on my career, and making plans with new and old friends, even though I find orchestrating things utterly stressful. I have to rebuild from the ground up and, hopefully, get to a place where I feel confident not just surviving but thriving on my own. Then, when I'm truly ready, maybe I'll try dating again. Maybe, when I'm strong enough, I'll test the waters with her. But I'm not making any plans for that, and I'm not reaching out. If she messages me, I keep it short, polite, and nothing more until I feel ready. There's one thing that keeps nagging at me, though, and maybe someone out there has dealt with the same. She begged me not to return the things she's given me over the years. She said, because I want us to be able to look back when we're old and see how much we love each other. Now I'm stuck with this huge bag of mementos, evidence of love and care, but I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at them without pain, especially if things keep going the way they are. Update 2. Once the weeks of no contact went by, we met up briefly. She told me she was breaking up with me, and I just couldn't bring myself to stay friends with her, even though that's what she wanted. At the time, I felt utterly alone. I had no close friends who I felt I could confide in, and honestly, looking back, I can see how much I needed to grow. After that final meeting, I spiraled hard. Depression had already been a shadow in my life throughout our relationship, but this breakup took things further. Suddenly I found myself passively suicidal, my thoughts drifting toward dark, detailed ways out. Luckily, my brother was living in the city then. He and a good friend truly pulled through for me, making sure I wasn't left alone with my thoughts. It was their support, combined with finally starting therapy, that helped me dig myself out of that hole. Therapy, especially, changed so much for me. I soon pushed myself back into the dating world, mostly through apps, jumping in pretty quickly, if I'm being honest, and apologies to anyone who was on the receiving end of my awkward rebound stage. Those months were a blur of self-discovery, painful realizations, and the slow, shaky process of figuring out who I was without her. Then, everything changed. Eventually I met someone new, now 28, and we clicked in a way I didn't know was possible. She was there for me through some critical moments, even when she barely knew me, and I can't overstate what that support meant. 5 years after our first meeting, here we are, married, and expecting our first child. I love her deeply. But to be honest, even well into this new relationship, wounds from the past still lingered. I struggled to talk about my old relationship with my new partner, and sometimes tried to forcibly push those memories out anytime they surfaced, because back then, for me, those memories were still more bitter than sweet. I knew I needed to keep doing the work. It took a while, but I finally threw out my last box of old relationship mementos. That act, small as it was, felt unbelievably helpful. I continued therapy, and I still go today. Time works its magic, though. These days, the past hardly crosses my mind, and when those days do resurface, it isn't with resentment or bitterness. Instead, it's a clear reminder of what I have now, how precious it is, and how much I need to nurture it. Of course, I'd be lying if I said I never considered reaching out to my ex. I got dangerously close to emailing her a bid for a friendship, maybe even just closure. Despite my efforts to keep her entirely blocked on social media, one impulsive, angry moment sealed that. I ended up with her new handles and posts anyway. Ironically, an ex passed them to me out of spite, almost daring me to look. But therapy helped me root down and ask myself, why do this? What do you hope to gain? And slowly, I realized my life and my heart were exactly where they needed to be. Update 3. Our daughter was born in the blue hour between night and morning, the kind of quiet where the city finally exhales and the streetlights feel almost kind. I won't pretend I was brave or cool, I was a mess of whispered encouragements, apple juice runs, and staring at numbers on a monitor like they were an ancient language I could learn in real time. When she cried, something in me reassembled on the spot. It was like a trapdoor in the floor of my life opened and, instead of falling, I found a whole other room underneath with more space than I'd ever realized I had. I didn't sleep for 2 days and couldn't stop smiling for a week. Even now, when she comes to my voice in the dark, I feel this odd sense of being exactly where I'm supposed to be, no second guessing, no scrambling to prove anything to anyone. A couple of weeks before that, on a dreary Sunday, we were trying to turn into a tradition. We ducked into this used bookstore near the hospital because the prenatal class let out early and we weren't ready to go home yet. It smells like cold paper and radiator dust, the kind of place where someone always coughs one aisle over and you feel guilty for not buying poetry. We were hunting bored books, because that's what new parents do when they're trying to pretend time moves slowly and their lists aren't multiplying in a car. I pulled down a copy of Corduroy from a shelf whose metal brackets were bent from years of being leaned into. It had that soft, nearly velvet cover from A Million Little Hands. I turned it over and then, without meaning to, open to the first page. My handwriting hit me first. The tilt, the cramped loop of my E's, the way I underlined the date twice because I thought that made it look more official. For you, I'd written, so you'll always know you were chosen before the button. There was a tiny coffee ring ghosting the corner where we'd spilled something in her dorm room and pretended we hadn't. The inside pane of the dust jacket had a pencil mark in the top right corner, -$2.50, the way the owner prices things when they are doing 5 jobs at once. I felt my stomach do with that useless elevator drop in. For a second, I forgot where I was. I showed my wife without saying anything at first. She read quietly and then looked at me the way she does when she sees 4 thoughts arrive in my head at once. "Are you okay?" she asked, not the way people ask out of habit, but like she was reaching a hand out in the dark. I laughed, which surprised me. Not mean, not bitter, more like a hiccup of disbelief that the world had decided to send me a postcard from a place I don't live anymore. The coincidence felt insane and, at the same time, so stupidly ordinary. People donate books. Cities circulate stories. Maybe she cleared out her apartment during a move, maybe a box ended up at this shop because it was closest to a bus stop. I don't believe in signs. But I couldn't pretend my heart wasn't making up metaphors 10 miles a minute. I bought it without bargaining, which the cashier clearly appreciated. We carried it to the car under my jacket like rain might erase the inscription. That night, when the house turned into that soft aquarium glow of night lights and white noise, we read it on the couch, my wife's head against my shoulder, my palm drumming an absent-minded waltz on the side of her belly. I felt the old ache flake at the door and then stepped back. I don't know how else to explain it. It wasn't forgiveness and it wasn't triumph. It was more like finding a window in a room I had once thought didn't have any. Weeks later, around 3 in the morning, when the baby finally melted into me like a warm loaf and the world got pin drop quiet, I took a pen and, under my old inscription, added a new one. "For you," I wrote, slow, careful, so you'll never think you have to be fixed to be loved. I dated it once. No underlines. The air monitor hummed, the radiator ticked out its thin little metronome, and there was no ghost of anyone else in the room. It felt like I'd physically moved something from one shelf of my life to another without losing what it was. The story didn't change, the meaning did. A few days after we came home, a mutual acquaintance sent a text about a faculty announcement at a school halfway across the world, her name in neat serif letters in a newsletter I didn't subscribe to, smiling in a blazer I could practically hear. It landed like a pebble in a lake already busy with dragonflies. I stared at it longer than it deserved and then set my phone down. I didn't reach out. Not out of anger. It just wasn't mine to pick up anymore. Every so often, when I'm rocking our daughter and the house has that hush of a stage waiting for the first line, my eyes wander to the nursery shelf. The little bear looks back from the spine with that stitched-up earnestness. I know what I used to be in that story. I know who held the needle, who waited to be chosen, who wandered in the dark after the store closed. Now, when I look at it, I don't see any of that. I see the way my wife laughs when she makes up whole new verses to lullabies. I see my daughter's fist slamming triumphantly into nothing like she's already won some invisible argument with gravity. I see a book that got lost, found, and put to work again. It's funny, I thought closure would be an email I never sent, a conversation I resisted having, a high road morality tale I could one day point to as evidence of growth. Instead, it turned out to be a $2.50 children's book with my own handwriting staring back at me from a life I don't want anymore. We turned the page and kept reading. That's all. And somehow, that was everything. Update 4. The neighborhood did the thing it does every late spring where the streets pretend to be small towns for a day: block party barricades, kids chalking impossible hopscotches, a band warming up under a tarp with the drummer tapping the same nervous pattern until it turns into music. My daughter had just discovered pointing and was deputizing everything: a dog, a puddle, a man with a has important. We were 2 hours past nap and living on samples of things served in paper boats. There was a repair calf tucked between a screen printer and a woman selling pickles. The sign was hand-lettered and earnest: mend, don't throw. I don't sew. Something stubborn in me sat down anyway. A volunteer with a thimble the size of a shot glass showed me how to hold the needle like it might run away. I was trying to anchor a wide yellow button back onto my daughter's cardigan because her fingers had learned the joy of prying. Thread looked too thin to matter, and then, once it caught, it looked like the only thing keeping the world from falling apart. My daughter was in her carrier, chewing a string of pretzels, one by one, and offering intermittent advice in the form of delighted vowels. I heard my name the way I used to hear it when someone was calling me from a study carrel, from the end of a corridor, from a doorway already closing. I didn't look up at first because my fingers were inside the stupid tiny universe of cloth and plastic and I'd finally gotten the angle right. When I did, she was there the way certain memories are, precise, a little unkind with their accuracy. No one tells you how quickly 8 years can fold up when you're standing under a pop-up tent that smells like rain and hot solder. She had a conference lanyard on, the school stamped clean and familiar in a font I recognized because I'd seen it, once, in a newsletter I pretended not to be looking at. Rolling suitcase, lightweight blazer, too optimistic for our weather. Hair a little shorter. Her smile not the old kind, not the "oh there you are" that used to undo me, more a careful courtesy, the kind you bring to fragile tables. She didn't say much at first. She reached down and picked up my daughter's pacifier off the asphalt like muscle memory, held it up, then paused because that's the difference now. We ask before we cross thresholds. I wiped it on my shirt and clipped it back. My daughter considered her with that unnerving baby focus that feels like being measured with a ruler no one else can see. "Hi," she said. I said hi back, in the voice I use with neighbors I like. "It's good to see you," she tried, and it wasn't a lie. It just wasn't what it meant when we were all edges and sparks. "I'm here for 2 days, she added, like an apology to the air. The volunteer pretended to be very interested in a man with a broken umbrella. I finished one neat X and felt bizarrely triumphant. She nodded at the button. "That's a good color," she said. "For a bear," my daughter announced with astonishing clarity, and then, as if she had been saving it for the exact moment life needed a screenwriter, she said her newest, crispest word. "Button." We both laughed in that helpless way you do when the universe gets smug. No but turn, isn't it? No, of course. Just an almost relief at being outnumbered by coincidence. "I found the book," I said, a truth dropped gently between us like it might bruise. She looked like a page turning. The calculation, the hit, the softening. "You did," she said. Not a question, and not surprise so much as recognition that things migrate toward where they need to be. "In a shop near the hospital," I added, because some details feel like topography. "We read it." She looked at my daughter then, fully. "I'm glad," she said. The words landed and stayed. A gust pushed the tarp, it popped like a cheap tent in a storm, and we all reached up at once to steady it, strangers with our hands on the same green edge. "When it settled," she said, "my father died in the winter." She didn't deliver it for my reaction, she put it in the room like you put down a heavy bag before your shoulder goes numb. "I came back for the service. I thought of you when I drove past the old places," she said, and then, with a tiny laugh that was half scold to herself, "You don't know them." "I'm sorry," I said, because I was. Grief has its own border control, and I had no passport for hers. We did not trade updates like currency. She didn't ask for pictures, I didn't offer them. She didn't say she'd seen my name somewhere, I didn't say I still knew the way her voice curls on certain vowels. The volunteer snipped my thread with a decisive sound and held a little sweater up between both hands, like he was blessing it. People clapped down the block, confetti from the kids' craft table blew up against our feet, and stuck to the spokes of my stroller like stars. "I used to think buttons were about holding things closed," she said, almost to herself, watching my daughter pat her newly secure sweater with solemn pride. "But I guess they keep things on, too." We stood in that thing quiet, for a heartbeat extra. Somewhere someone fired up a grill and the air turned the particular fairground delicious that makes you feel 13, and broke. My wife texted, "Where are you, need lemonade?" And I felt my hand go to my pocket automatically, the small gravity of our current life tugging like a tide. She saw the motion and stepped back first. "I have to get to a panel," she said, and there it was, the gentleness we never really found the words for back then. "Congratulations," she added, and it didn't sound like a script. "On all of it." "Thank you," I said, and meant the same. We didn't hug. She stuck her hand out and, after a second that felt no longer than it was, I shook it. It was absurdly formal and exactly right. She touched the edge of the stroller with 2 fingers the way you test a surface for heat and then corrected herself and just waved. We peeled away in opposite directions because that is how streets work. I took the long route to the lemonade to give the adrenaline time to burn itself off. My daughter fell asleep at a speed that didn't make sense, her mouth slack around a pretzel nub, the repaired button winking like a little captured sun with each step. I found my wife at a table with paper cups already sweating in the inevitable pile of napkins we always overtake. I told her in one sentence, and then the next, smaller than it had felt a minute earlier, not because it didn't matter but because it slotted into place without needing a mallet. Later that night, after the dishwasher's tired rattle and after the bath where she splash laughed so hard she hiccuped, I set the cardigan on the back of a chair and had this urge to thank it, which is ridiculous, and also exactly what I did in my head. The stitch wasn't pretty if you looked for flaws, but it was true. It would hold. I used to think closure was a door slamming, or an email you don't send, or a moral you rinse and reuse. Today it was a tent flap snapping in a light wind while a stranger helped me fix something small and necessary. We didn't untie anything. We fastened what we had and kept walking. The band finally found their song. My daughter dreamed with her fingers opening and closing like she was practicing for the day she'll be the one doing the sewing. Update 5. The first cold day came light up light stranger hat in hand, asking if we minded if he opened the window. Our block did the panic migration we always do when the seasons flip, bike to onto hooks, plants dragged inside, the Sutton search for where last winter put its scarves. Somewhere between a nap that didn't take and soup that did, I taped a piece of paper to the door that said men, night in fat marker, and our living room turned into a modest little fix-it harbor. Neighbors brought lamps that blinked like nervous eyes, a coat with its lining muttering secrets, a stuffed otter who had been loved into a soft blur. We had a kettle going and a tray of cookies that collapsed in on themselves and tasted like forgiveness anyway. My daughter ran intake with the absolute authority of 3, she stamped things with star stickers and announced which objects were sad and which were fine. I put out my toolbox, the weird little family of pliers and screwdrivers I always forget the names of, and a shallow cigar tin I'd found at a yard sale for $1, full of buttons like an unset galaxy. They clinked in that satisfying way when you tilt them, an accidental song. Somewhere around the second lamp and before the otter's ear, the mail came late, a rubber-banded bundle tucked under an elastic that said it had been on a long trip. One envelope had my name in a hand I didn't know and an overseas stamp with a building drawn so cleanly it looked like it could hold sound. I almost didn't open it because the room was humming in that particular domestic register that makes you want to keep it exactly where it is. My wife put a hand on my back and, with her eyes, told me I could make space for both. Inside, there was paper thin enough to make a whisper when it moved. "I am writing to you as a stranger," it began, and then my old life stepped into the doorway again without making it a performance. It was her mother's voice measured in a way that tells you some people keep their own weather contained. She wrote that she had found a box while deciding what to do with a house that had too many corners of memory in it. A box of letters and postcards and one slim book with a coffee ring on the corner. She said she hadn't read much, that she didn't think that was her right, but she had seen my name and enough to understand that I loved her daughter when loving was a verb we were both still learning how to do. She said she was sorry. Not like something to be solved, not as an assignment turned in late. More like an observation that finally decided to be spoken aloud. She wrote, "It was not fair to keep a whole room of her life off limits to you," and I sat down very suddenly in the chair next to the lamp someone swore was haunted. Folded inside was an old photograph that didn't belong to me in the way some things still asked to be seen. A little girl on a checkered rug with a bear whose missing button had been replaced by a coin and masking tape. In the background, a woman I knew only as the absence in our 8 years was kneeling with a needle threaded, looking up mid-laugh like she'd been told a joke that got better every time. There was also a tiny paper packet folded with that precise thrift of someone who has been doing it forever. A button fell into my palm like a small planet of pale blue that scrambled for the word between sky and dishwater and landing on both. From my mother's jar, she wrote, "I don't know where these all go anymore. Please let someone small choose what shines." If you want to know what a heart does when a sentence like that lands, picture a drop stitch being caught by instinct you didn't know you'd practiced. My daughter, who had been busy auditing an umbrella for sincerity, came over because my palms make a noise when I'm holding a thought I can't quite carry by myself. I opened my hand. She considered the little blue circle with grave ceremony, then nodded like a forewoman approving a blueprint. "For my coat," she declared, and ran to wrestle the zipper down in that whole body way kids put on effort, then presented the gap where a button had clearly given up last March and we had been pretending it was just a fashion choice. I found the right needle by touch and not by sight because the room had filled with that low, floating dust you only get in winter when the day decides to end early. The thread didn't want to cooperate until it did. The button sat exactly where it wanted to live, which felt, I'll admit, absurd and cosmic at the same time. I sewed in a clumsy circle that got neater when I remembered to breathe. My daughter narrated the process with sound effects that would put Foley artists out of work. Across the room, the otter regained an ear and my neighbor cried with the intimacy of relief that comes when something small is made right after a long time of nothing being wrong enough to ask for help. When I tied the last knot and bit the thread, she patted the button like it might purr. She twisted, held her coat out in front of her, and then hugged it the way people hug people they are proud of. My wife kissed the top of her head and then, quietly, the side of mine. I sat at the dining table with the letter again when the house emptied out into the winter and all the borrowed lamps found their own light. I wrote back with a pen that insists on being overly dramatic and told her thank you for the kindness of naming what was unnamed. I didn't try to make either of us narrators of a story we didn't live together. I told her about the button only in the way you tell whether a thing that happened and made the air look different for a minute. I didn't ask for her daughter's address. If it finds its way there through the slow telegraph of families and holidays and someone's careful filing, good. If not, also good. Some prayers stay whole by not being stamped and routed. A week later, my friend who teaches in the English department sent me a link with a one-line "you might like this, or not." It was an essay in a journal I didn't know, by her, about winter and museums and grief that behaves. It was so good it made me notice my own breath. At the bottom, there was a note about a fellowship named for her father and a line about repair that I could have underlined if I was still the kind of person who marks books to convince myself I'm learning. I closed the tab because that felt like the right size of acknowledgement. Out the window it was the kind of snow that switches the city into manual, each thing needing hands again. I had this small physical urge to bring the button jar into the nursery and let it watch us build a block tower, which is ridiculous, and which I did not do. Instead I taught my daughter the way to loop thread without tangling. It looks exactly like a magic trick if you flick your wrist at the right moment. She took it with the solemnity of a trade secret and then turned it into a dance, because that is what she does with everything. The coat held for the next storm and the one after that. I used to think healing was a door you finally close hard enough, that the latch gives up. Tonight it was the sting of a needle in my fingertip, the metallic bloom on my tongue, a small blue circle in the exact right place, and a stranger across an ocean sending a handful of circles in a sentence that let a few rooms in my chest unbolt themselves and breathe. We didn't reopen anything. We fastened something that was already ours and stepped out into the kind of cold you earn with good work. The sky had that dry clear sound to it. Our breath turned into brief ghosts and then into nothing at all.